now we're here doing the pre-trip walk around. Okay, you have when you start your pre-trip walk around, you will start it by a section per section, a step by step. You're going to be using your hands, be talking and pointing at the same time. Okay, when you finish your air brake inspection, you will come out in front of the truck and stand in the center. Okay? You're going to be talking about the lights, the windshield, the wipers, the signal lights, the headlights, and you're going to be checking for leaks. Okay. I'm going to start with my top lights. The 3 in the center indicates it's a commercial vehicle. The 2 on the side indicates the height and the width of the vehicle. Making sure these lights turn on and off, they're not cracked or broken, properly mounted to the truck, proper color is amber. Okay, now we come to the windshield and wipers. You will tell the examiner, I already set it inside, would you like me to say it again? Because you did it inside when you did your checklist. And if he says no, then you move on. Okay, my signal lights. Turning signals, make sure they turn on and off. They're not cracked or broken, that they're properly mounted to the truck, and the proper color is amber. Now I come to my headlights. High beam and low beam should turn on and off. They're not cracked or broken, and they're properly mounted to the truck. Now we come to check our leaks. We're checking for oil leaks, power steering leaks, coolant leaks, and we're listening for air leaks. See? What you want to do is motivate yourself, get into it, show some personality. Motivate yourself to do this. You will do it. Okay, now we're going to start in the engine compartment on the passenger side. Okay, I'll come to the reservoir. Make sure the reservoir is not cracked or leaking, that it's properly mounted. The water should be at its maximum level. If it's not, I would add it on top. We're checking the hoses. Make sure the hoses are not cracked or leaking, that they're properly mounted tight. Come to the alternator. Should have no exposed wires or bare wires, that the alternator is properly mounted, that it's not loose, and it's belt driven. Checking the water pump. Make sure the water pump is not cracked or leaking, that it's properly mounted, that it's not loose. Checking the hoses. Make sure there's no cracks and no leaks, and they're properly mounted. Clamps are properly tight, and it's also belt driven. We're making sure that our belts are not cracked or torn, not too tight or too loose, that we have proper tension. So there's 3 things you gotta talk about on this side: coolant, alternator, and water pump. Now we go to the driver's side. Okay, come to the oil. This is where I check the oil. I will take the dipstick out, I will clean it. If I need to, I will add it on top. Now I come to the compressor and governor. Compressor and governor is gear driven. I should have no cracks and no leaks, and they should be properly mounted. Now we come to the hoses, making sure the hoses have no cracks and they have no leaks, and they're properly mounted, that the clamps are properly tight. Come to the power steering reservoir, and I come to the power steering pump. It's also gear driven. We're making sure the power steering pump, it has no cracks and no leaks, that it's properly mounted. Checking the hoses for no cracks and leaks, and they're properly mounted. Now we come to the reservoir. The reservoir should have no cracks and no leaks, that it's also properly mounted tight and it's not loose. It should be at its maximum proper level. If it's not, I will add it on top. Also the hose. Making sure the hose has no cracks and no leaks, that they're properly mounted tight, the clamps are tight, not loose. Also, check the frame. Frame should have no cracks and no legal weldings. Okay, now we come to a section. This is my steering section. Start with the steering column. Make sure it's not cracked or bent, that the U-joints are well greased and they're properly mounted. Checking the steering box. It should have no cracks, it should have no leaks, that it's properly mounted tight, that it's not loose. Also has a hose. Make sure the hoses are not cracked, they're not leaking, and they're properly mounted tight. Now I come to the steering leakages. All my steering leakages should not be cracked, broken. Checking the bolts and castle nuts, that all the bolts and castle nuts are not loose or not missing, that they're properly tight. Checking the cotter pins, that all the cotter pins are not cracked or broken or missing. Checking the bushings. All the bushings should not be torn, should not be cracked or missing. Okay, now we come to our suspension. Key sections, most repeated sections. Suspension to the brakes to the tires. Suspension, brakes and tires. Suspension, brakes and tires. Start from the suspension to the brakes and you work yourself to the tires. Okay, we'll start with the spring mount. Making sure the spring mount is not cracked or broken, that it's properly mounted to the frame. Checking the bushings, they're inside the spring mount. Make sure they're not cracked or broken or missing. We come to our leaf springs. Should have no legal weldings. They should not be cracked or broken. That the U-bolts should also not be cracked or broken. They should not be loose, that they're properly mounted tight. Now we come to the shock absorber. Shock absorber should not be cracked or broken or bent. That it's properly mounted, that the bushings are not torn or cracked or missing. Now we come to our brake section. These are our service brakes. Checking the hoses. Make sure there's no cracks and no leaks, that they're properly mounted tight. This is the brake chamber. Brake chamber should have no cracks and no leaks, that the brackets and bolts are properly tight. Slack adjuster should be at a 90-degree angle, that the cotter pins are not missing. The push rod, keep your eye on the push rod. This is the push rod that's going to come out. Okay, that's the push rod. Push rod should have no more than 1 inch play, but to adjust these brakes, I should have no more than 1 inch and a quarter. I will grab a 9/16, turn it clockwise tight on the adjusting nut, and back it off a quarter. That's the way you adjust these brakes. Brake drum. No oil, no grease, and no cracks. Brake shoes should have no less than a quarter. Now we come to the tires. The inflation is 90 to 105 or manufacturer recommended. The condition should have no cuts, bubbles, or nails in either side. The tire, the depth is 432 seconds, and these tires are not permitted to be recapped. Now we come to the valve stem. Should not be touching the rim or leaking any air. The rim should have no cracks, no legal weldings. All the lug nuts should not be loose, they should not be missing, that they're properly tight. We come to the hub oil seal. Should have no cracks, no leaks, that the bolts are properly tight. This is where I check the hub oil level, and this is where I'm gonna add it if I need some. At D&V, you don't have to open this. Okay, so remember, you have sections here. You start with your oil, compressor and governor, power steering pump, frame, the steering section, and then suspension, brakes, and tires. Okay, now we come to the driver's side tractor. Okay, the mirrors, the window, and the door. Remember, during your checklist, you already said everything inside. But that's why you asked the examiner, would you like me to repeat the mirrors, window, and door? I already said it inside. If he says no, then you move on. If he says yes, then you talk about it again. And you say, make sure the door is not damaged, that will put me out of service. Now we come to the back side of the tractor. The windows, back window, wipers, reservoir. I already said it inside. Would you like me to say it again? If the examiner says no, then you move on. But if he says yes, he wants to hear it again, then you talk about the window, back window, and you talk about the washer wire again. Okay? Come to the fuel tank. Making sure that the straps and seals are not cracked or broken, that the straps and fuel tank are properly mounted to the frame. We have a cap here. The cap should not be missing. We also have a seal, making sure the seal is not torn or cracked, that the T-chain is not missing. At D&V, you don't have to take the cap out. You just talk about it. and we should have no diesel leaks. Now we come to our battery box. We're making sure the battery box is not hanging, that it's not loose, that it's properly mounted to the frame. Okay, we go inside. Once again, at DMV, you don't have to open the battery box. But I'm going to open it to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, the cables should have no exposed wires or bare wires. Terminals should have no corrosion. The battery level should be at a maximum level, and I should have no battery leaks. Okay, we're going to start with the section. I'm going to start from the front header board to the lights, to the connections, catwalk, frame, hoses and air tanks, and drive shaft. Okay, once you're done with the battery box, you tell the examiner that you're going to start with the front side trailer. You start with your lights. Make sure they turn on and off, and they're not cracked or broken. Proper color is amber. Then you come to the header board. Make sure there's no damages or sheet metal hanging, that the rivets are in place. Now you come to your lines. I have electric line. There should be no exposed wires. The connection opens and closes. I have two air lines. The red one is my emergency. The blue one is my service. I should have no cracks or leaks on my lines. That the glad hands are not cracked or broken. That the seals are not torn or leaking in the air. At DMV, you don't have to take this out. Just talk about it. Come to the catwalk. Make sure the catwalk has no oil, no grease, and it's properly mounted to the frame. We're checking the frame. No illegal weldings and no cracks. We're checking the drive shaft. Making sure the drive shaft, it's not hanging, that it's not loose, that it's properly mounted, that the U-joints are well greased. Checking the hoses. Hoses and air tanks should have no cracks, no leaks, and they're properly mounted to the frame. Okay. Now we come to the fifth wheel section. Fifth wheel section. This is the fifth wheel mounting bolts. We're making sure they're not missing, they're not loose, that they're properly mounted to the frame. Release arm and safety latch, talking about them both. They should not be cracked, broken, or missing. This is your platform, this is your apron. It should be well greased and no gaps. Now we come to the locking jaw and kingpin. Okay, this is the locking jaw. That's the kingpin. Talk about them both. That the locking jaw and kingpin, they're not cracked, they're not broken, no legal welds, and it's well greased. Okay. Once you're done with your fifth wheel, come to your sections again. Suspension, to the brakes, to the tires. Okay. The suspension. We come to the suspension. In the suspension back here, there's a difference. Okay, there's a difference in the suspension, which is the airbag. Okay. In the front, you have a spring mount, bushings, leaf spring, U-bolts, and shock absorber. Well, everything's the same back here. I also have a spring mount, a bushing, a leaf spring, a shock absorber, and the only difference is the airbag. So when you're at DMV, you want to ask them, sir or ma'am, may I tell you the difference on the suspension? And they say, go ahead, Juan.